When I first fell in love with movies, I wasn't thinking about whether they were art or entertainment. That distinction came later. But depending on who you ask and where you are in the film industry, that distinction can completely change how you're allowed to make movies. When I first got into film, I was drawn to the entertainment side of it. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an actor and I performed in theater, and that was the thing that was exciting to me, was putting on a show for people, being the center of attention, and really entertaining somebody. And I'd always heard acting considered like a performing art, but I never really thought about it in that way. I thought about it as a show, something fun, something that people would watch. And when I started becoming more interested in being behind the camera and making films myself, the things I wanted to go make were just things that I thought were cool. Maybe a cool scene, a cool shot, maybe I wanted to try a visual effect that I saw in a certain movie. I wasn't thinking about being poetic or the artistic side of filmmaking. But once I actually got into the film industry, the language about movies changed. It became less about whether something was cool and more about whether it was justified. I moved to LA to go to film school right after high school and found myself surrounded by other kids that were also passionate about making movies, who grew up watching the same type of movies that were inspired by Star Wars, The Matrix, and all these kinds of movies that had big spectacles, special effects. And you had kids that were fans of Martin Scorsese, David Lynch, Quentin Tarantino, and those sorts of films as well. When I got into film school is when I was sort of introduced to this idea of filmmaking as like an art form. There was still a mix of people wanting to just make cool stuff that was visually entertaining. Music videos were a big thing at the time, but you also had people that were really obsessive about like the auteur, filmmakers like David Lynch or David Cronenberg or Martin Scorsese, and it introduced me to this whole other side of filmmaking where film suddenly became like very self-aware and everything had to mean something. And I think there's a lot of pressure on film students to make something that has a lot of meaning or depth. And typically what ends up happening is that they try to go so deep that the films don't even make sense anymore. And that's what you would hear as like a typical student film. That it's so artistic and poetic that the narrative doesn't actually make any sense. And while there probably is some meaning, the filmmaker has the meaning in what they're trying to portray, but they're not giving the audience enough information to connect with it, and it does become like a piece of visual poetry.
I was extremely interested in non-story, non-character movies, just pure cinema.
When you're young, you make things instinctively. You make them because they're cool, because they're things that you want to see.
I don't care about structure, I don't care about genre, anything. I just ignore all of that and just make what's in my mind and let other people determine the labels for themselves.
But the moment you involve other people, producers, investors, the industry, then the questions start to come. What's it about? What's the theme? What does this movie say? What's the tone? And I'll never forget, the first feature film that I wrote was inspired by early Peter Jackson and Sam Raimi, and it was something I felt that I could just do very gritty, and it would have a lot of humor, but a lot of horror, and mixing those two genres together, and it felt like so cool and punk rock, and I just had all these cool scenes, and monsters, and special effects, and all that kind of stuff. And I remember when I went to go pitch it to this junior executive, he asked me what the tone of the movie was, and it completely stopped me in my tracks. I didn't even really know what that meant. What is tone? Like, what is the tone of any movie? How would you define the tone of any certain movie? And so I really started researching, like, what is tone? What is the tone of this movie? I mean, my movie is kind of similar to this one. What's the tone of that? It wasn't like theme, like what's the genre? And on paper, on a script, it's very difficult to get the tone across in a script. You look at a film like Shaun of the Dead with Edgar Wright, and you have to explain to somebody what's the tone. Like, it's a comedy, yeah, there's funny parts.
Dice straight. Throw it.
But there's also serious dramatic parts.
Ed, can you pull over?
And there's scary parts. And it's kind of a mix of all that stuff. It wasn't taken too seriously, but there were moments that you could be taken serious, and those things seemed like they completely clashed with each other, and you couldn't have a movie that was serious and funny at the same time. That's why Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is one of my favorite movies, because it combines virtually every genre. It's fun, it's fantastical, it's creepy, it's funny, it's a musical, it's everything combined into one movie. And the tone is very hard to explain because it's sort of just a combination of everything. It's like when you mix a bunch of flavors of soda together. It's like, it tastes good, you don't know why, but it's not any certain flavor. And if somebody asks you what flavor this is, you'd kind of just say all of them. And suddenly you're being asked to intellectualize things that you never intellectualized before, things that aren't really meant to be that deep. At some point, it's like spectacle without explanation becomes suspicious. If you wanted to do an action scene or a visual effects sequence just because you thought it was cool, it started to feel like you needed to apologize for it. Films that leaned heavily into spectacle often were treated as lesser unless you could attach some deeper meaning to it. And institutions things like the Academy Awards tend to reinforce this idea that films with obvious metaphoric or poetic intentions are more valuable. And it doesn't mean that those films aren't great, it just means that those films are rewarded for how they talk about themselves. But then I heard something that was pretty encouraging that was the opposite of this narrative. It was an interview with Sam Raimi where he was talking about his films and he referred to himself as an entertainer.
The aim in making Evil Dead was to entertain the people. Really to entertain them. And the reason why it was a horror film was because we felt that it was the most easily marketed type of picture we could make. We always knew that there's a circuit for horror films. They always seemed to be playing. And that had a lot to do with the decision to make Evil Dead.
That he makes movies as a form of entertainment, and he considers himself an entertainer. As a filmmaker, he's creating something to present to an audience to show them that they could sit back and be entertained by the things that he's showing them. Because it stripped away the obligation. It reminded me why I was drawn to this in the first place. This whole art versus entertainment debate shows up in really practical ways when you're making films, especially when you're choosing the music. Sometimes you're looking for something big and bold and immediately engaging. Other times you're looking for something quieter, more abstract, or experimental. That's why today's sponsor Audiio makes a lot of sense in this conversation. They've got tons of high quality music, and what I like the most is how flexible their search tools are. They also have a feature called Link Match where you can drop in a link and it'll help suggest music with a similar feel, which is incredibly useful if you're somebody that likes to use temp music or you're looking for something with a very specific tone. I use licensed music all the time for pitch videos, title sequences, early explorations of tone, and being able to explore different directions makes a huge difference. Audiio keeps licensing simple with a subscription, so if you're a filmmaker or a creative, I highly recommend that you give them a try. And if you do, check out the link in the description below where you can get 70% off the first year of Audiio Pro, which gives you unlimited music, sound effects, stems, and AI search tools. So whether your project is more art-driven or entertainment-focused, having the right music will make a big difference. Not every film needs to justify itself intellectually in order to earn its right to exist in the world of cinema. This reminds me of Indiana Jones. There's a transcript that exists online of George Lucas, Lawrence Kasdan, and Steven Spielberg when they sat down to write Raiders of the Lost Ark. One of the key set pieces and scenes that they had of this idea of who Indiana Jones was this chase scene where Indiana Jones leapt from a horse to a truck. That was like the quintessential visual of the movie, and everything was sort of based around that idea and that visual scene. And that just reminds you, these are creative people coming up with things that just seem cool. They imagined that, it felt like something out of Zorro, something that would be in these serial westerns, and just something cool that they wanted to put on screen. And then from there, of course, you could develop the emotional arc and the physical stakes and all these things that a movie needs in order to follow along for an hour and a half, 2 hours. But they didn't need to justify the fact that this is the kind of movie, the piece of entertainment that they wanted to bring into the world, that they wanted to show an audience. And there are ways to combine the two, like it doesn't have to be just art or just entertainment. Oftentimes people think of commercial filmmaking where it's something that's supposed to be meant for everybody, and something that is a little bit more artistic, that is personal, that might speak to fewer people, but speaks to them on a deeper emotional level. And the cool thing is that there are filmmakers and people that make movies for both. Michael Bay makes probably the best action movies. If you want to see a spectacle action movie or action scenes, you know that if you go see a Michael Bay movie, that's what you're gonna get. If you go back and watch something from Tarkovsky, you know that you're going to get something with emotional, intellectual, poetic depth. And the meaning of it might not be apparent to you right off the bat, but that's kind of the value that a film like that as an art piece has. And today, filmmakers like Christopher Nolan are making huge spectacle movies that every time they come out, I'm going to the theater to watch it 100%, because it is that kind of film. And I love that we have filmmakers like Tarkovsky that we can go back and watch their films and appreciate it on a much deeper level. And the problem isn't art. The problem is when everything is expected to carry the same weight. I think somewhere along the way, filmmaking stopped being about instinct and started becoming about expectation. And me personally, I'm slowly trying to find my way back to the instinct without losing the craft. So going back to the question of whether movies are a form of art or entertainment, I think that they're both, and depending on what you're drawn to, that could change over time. Lately, I've found myself being drawn back to films that feel more like art. Films that feel like they're a direct expression of the filmmaker. Because I know for me as a filmmaker, the endeavor of making a film is so hard that it sort of feels like an art form in and of itself just to get through the process of making the film. And inevitably, you're putting parts of yourself into the movie that might be subconscious that you don't even realize. And you come out on the other side and surprise yourself once you see the forest for the trees and realize, wow, I didn't realize that I was telling this part of myself in the story.
All of them are some form of autobiography. Pacific Rim, even Blade 2. I mean, seriously, like Nomak and his father, that relationship is very much the way I felt about my dad, the poor man. All art is portraiture. All art is portraiture.
And in so many ways, making a film could be such a cathartic process. And when you're writing a film, just the life experiences that you have, that you go through, that you can put into the film to connect with other people on an emotional level. So for me, there's already something automatically artful about the pursuit of making a film. And in the past, there's been a lot of films like this that I have immense respect for, but that I don't fully understand. Like, I remember the first time that I watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, I think it took me 3 attempts to get through the entire movie, because I didn't understand what was going on. There wasn't like a clear narrative to me, and to me it felt more like a piece of art rather than a piece of entertainment. I wasn't hooked into it the way that I would have if I was watching a spectacle film. But after watching the full thing and really understanding the craft of what it took to make that film in that time, and just the beauty of the cinematography and the filmmaking techniques that Kubrick used to put this vision on film, is incredible. And to me, I can watch it just merely as a piece of art. And that might be the difference today of films that are art versus entertainment, is maybe it's that the spectacles are the ones that are going to demand the attention of a theater experience, versus something that's artistic could be viewed anywhere, anytime. If you think about a painting, you hang it in your home so that you could pass by it and look at it. And maybe you need to spend more time with a film that's a little bit more artistic. And in a theater, you really want to see the spectacle, you want to be surrounded by people, and it feels more like an event. And I think early on, this is where a lot of student filmmakers fall into a trap. They're over abstracting, avoiding clarity, confusing mystery for depth, mistaking confusion for sophistication. It's often a reaction to over-explaining, so filmmakers tend to swing too far in the other direction, where things start to not make sense anymore. But if the audience can't emotionally or logically connect to anything, then they have nothing to hold on to. And there's definitely a place for films that don't really make sense. 2001 famously confused a lot of people, especially the ending. The difference is that 2001 is anchored in craft, intention, a level of experience and mastery from Kubrick, even if its meaning is ambiguous. Not a lot of people know this, but Stanley Kubrick actually did explain what the ending of A 2001: Space Odyssey meant in an interview.
He is taken in by godlike entities, creatures of pure energy and intelligence with no shape or form, and they put him in what I suppose you could describe as a human zoo.
I think it's a mistake to think that films can only be art or only entertainment. I think both are valuable in different ways, and there's an audience for both of these kinds of films. You just need to be clear and honest and self-aware about what kind of film that you're trying to make, and find like-minded people that want to make those kind of films. If it's a spectacle, there's going to be studios, producers, and investors that will be very interested in that kind of movie, probably more so than the art films. And if you want to make a piece of art, then there definitely are that art house type of independent production companies that were going to be more interested in that kind of a movie. And both of those will find an audience. Some films are meant to be felt, some films are meant to just be enjoyed, and some films really want you to think. For me, the challenge is learning when to let that instinct lead and when to allow the meaning to catch up later. So much of the value that a director brings to a movie production is their taste, is their instinct, because as much planning as there is on a film production, you need somebody that can lead, who can make decisions on the fly, somebody that has a vision, that has an instinct, and that has taste, that sees the whole movie and can make a decision on where to lead people to go in order to achieve that vision. So the bottom line is that some movies are meant to entertain us, some movies are meant to challenge us, and some do both. The problem isn't choosing between art or entertainment. The problem is forgetting why we fell in love with movies in the first place. I would love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this, because this is meant to be a discussion. Movies mean different things to everybody. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Are movies art? Are they entertainment? Are they both? What do you think? How do you feel? What's your favorite kind of movie? Thank you to everybody that's watched this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and that's gonna do it for today. So until next time, later.